What we're going to do in this session is called the connected consumer. So we all know that consumers are very agile now. They're ever evolving, how they absorb media, how they move, what devices they use. So what we're going to do this session, we're going to look at that connectivity piece. So how the whole part of media is connected, how you reach these new consumers. To help us do that, we're going to have a little session. We've got two fabulous speakers. We've got James Galpin, who is the head of media and digital solutions at Millward Brown for LatAm. And we've got Aris Dewan, who is the president of Clear Channel Outdoor for LatAm. So the format's going to follow. James is going to come up first and set the scene and the context with some fantastic research and insights into connectivity. And then Aris is going to come up and he's going to show us exactly how it's being used and how outdoor makes the whole connectivity piece tick over. We'll then have Q&A. So I want to make sure you've all got pens and paper in your hands and ask some questions. We don't want to be like that room where they didn't ask any questions. So I'm relying on you guys to make this session even better. And that'll be the end of the session. So let's give a big round of applause to our first speaker, James.
Hi, good morning. I'm going to speak to you a little bit about, two different study areas that we've used to understand how our clients, brand owners particularly, can connect better with consumers in Latin America. Hopefully, I think a lot of it will reflect things that we all know are happening, we all see are happening around us, but rather than the future gazing, which was fascinating and very enjoyable, we saw to start this morning, this is more prosaic. It's about what's happening with consumers now. So when you're thinking about, I've got to market and sell my brand today, this is what's happening at the moment, and this just gives you some sense of the reality that brands have to exist in today and think about when they're developing marketing programs for now. So firstly, whoops, I hope we're working, that's better. Just going to give you some very top-level findings from a study called Ad Reaction. Now this is a global study we've run across 37 countries this year, I think a total across about just under 18,000 consumers across the globe. They are all smartphone owners, so people who have a smartphone or a tablet device. Yeah? So that's our pool. Now clearly that number is already a high percentage of most populations in the world. It's a high percentage of most Latin American population, but it is still growing fast, so it's only going to become more so. But I do just want to point out, here we're talking to the people who are already, this sounds terribly pretentious, the future, i.e. they're where everybody is going, they're here, they're there already. And there's lots of them already, as you all know from penetration numbers around smartphones across the region. So firstly, what this study focused on, Ad Reaction's a study we've run for many years, but we don't do the same thing every time. So we focus on different issues around particularly digitally focused media and how they're evolving and how consumers use them evolving to help our clients make better use of those opportunities. This year we've focused on multi-screening and the relationship between screens. The first thing to say is that in Latin America, overall screen usage, and that's across 4 screens, TV, smartphones, laptops, PCs, and tablets. Yeah? So overall screen usage across Latin America is 5% higher than the global average. On average, we're looking at around just over 7 hours, 7.25 hours of screen usage a day for Latin American consumers, around 7 for the global average. Yeah? And also I should have said this in the intro, I just want to list, we're 7 countries in Latin America here. Yeah, we covered Brazil, Argentina, Colombia, Chile, Ecuador, Peru, have I missed any? Mexico, sorry, obviously. So 7 markets across the region, so a fairly representative read across the major markets in the region. I think the really telling thing about this usage is the red line. So this is now looking at how the screens are used over the day. And I think the unavoidable reality is that smartphones are always there. There are apparently some dips in that chart, but all they are when you're asleep. So if you're awake, the smartphone is happening. The other screens still fulfill their roles. TV still peaks in the evening, is the center stage in the evening, peak times. The workhorse of a laptop is still strong during the day, less so into the evenings, for obviously used for more functional purposes and so on. But the smartphone is just never not there. It's always there. So it is the connective tissue of people's screen usage, more than just screens to be fair, but in the context of this, it is the constant of screen usage. And then let's look a little bit at how screens are used. I think, firstly, you have to deal with a concept, and this is a little bit tricky, so bear with me just while I want to clarify two things here. When we talk about those 7 hours, that's minutes spent with screens that you're using. Now, you can do individual screens 1 minute at a time, so 1 minute on TV, 1 minute on smartphone separately at different times, 2 minutes in total. But of course, you can also multi-screen. So you can be using your smartphone while watching TV. So the way we're counting here is if you're using a smartphone, when we ask the consumers using a smartphone and the TV, if that's for a minute, that's 2 minutes of screen time. 1 minute for the smartphone, 1 minute for the TV. What we see is around a third of screen usage is multi-screening. People are using 2 screens at the same time, simultaneously multi-screening. Yes, there's plenty of time when people are using individual screens and migrating between them for different uses and purposes. We'll come back to that in a second. And then we want to deep dive a little bit more into the multi-screening. What are people doing when we're talking about those multi-screening things? There are really 2 splits, again, within that. There's multi-screening around related content, where what you're doing or consuming on one screen is related to or built on by what you're doing or using, consuming on the other screen. So that's what we call meshing, screens meshing together. So the content is related and integrated around the same subject matter. The other is stacking. You're consuming one type of piece of content on one screen and doing something unrelated, consuming other unrelated content, doing unrelated tasks on another screen. So stacking. So 2 different things at once or around the same thing together. And actually, only about a third of the multi-screening time is meshing, really integrated usage. About 2/3 is stacking, 2 different things at once. And what are the sorts of things that people are doing there? They're looking at the green bars, and sorry, this is the most researchy chart I've got. I should have said at the beginning, I am a market researcher. We have bar charts, we have data. I've tried to make them prettier and clearer than some research charts, but this is where it got the better of me. But the key thing I want to highlight are the bars in pink. The bars in pink highlight that the social media interaction is a really big driver of dual screening in both cases. Whether you're meshing, you're often talking to friends about the programming, the content you say watching on TV. But even when you're stacking, a lot of the dual screening is driven by the ability to stay in touch with people and talk and contact people, separate from and not necessarily related to the content you're consuming on TV. So there are different reasons, but that consumer connection with each other is a massively powerful and important driver of why people use their smartphones. Now, you all know this. You all watch TV. You all text, email, social media, connect with your friends while you're consuming content too. It's part of everybody's life. I guess what we're just trying to do is put some hard numbers on it and see just how much it happens. I think the other thing to understand is a little bit about the relationship between the screens and how the flow between the screens happens. And I think that what we do see is a very different potential for interaction and multi-screening between different screen devices. So if you're looking at laptops, they're actually the device that has the lowest proportion of shared time. Now, I think that reflects the nature of the device, and we did qualitative work around this as well, which supports this. It is still a very task-focused device. When you're on a laptop, you're usually doing something very specific. You're very focused on that task, and it doesn't lend itself as much to dual screening and interacting on the device. It still happens a bit, and obviously sometimes the laptop may be the dual screen device while you're watching a TV program. So the overlap with TV is where we tend to see it the most. But when you look at smartphones, a far higher proportion of smartphone usage happens in coincidental to and around the time that you're using another device. And obviously TV is a big part of that, but it isn't just about your TV. You know, you're on your laptop, you have your smartphone as well, and so on. So I think that the nature of the device, but also the nature of the things that people do on their devices influences the way the screens interact together. And I think that the point of all of this is to say, look, these are the opportunities and moments that marketers have to talk to consumers, and they need to think about the way that people are using those different environments and how they can leverage them to speak more effectively to them. So it's important to understand the way that consumers are using those devices and relating to them. And another really important factor on that, I'll skip this screen in the interest of time, doesn't help a great deal, is to understand the relationship with advertising around those screens. And that's where things get a little bit more difficult, because we can see this massively scaling opportunity in smartphone clearly. It's part of the fabric of everybody's lives. You all know it, you're all using it, you can't leave home without it, you know how lost you are without it. So that's normal. That's normal for normal consumers too, not just people in our industry. But one of the real challenges is that ad receptivity is, look, we've looked at ad receptivity for years, and ad receptivity for TV is that people are a lot more open to advertising when they're consuming TV content than they are to some of the other devices. And it's really related to the personal nature of the devices. Ad receptivity is less, or is lower for more personal devices. So if you look at this chart, you'll see that there is least openness to advertising on smartphones and tablets, which are the most personal devices. It doesn't mean you can't communicate with consumers in those places. It doesn't mean that brands shouldn't be looking at marketing them, but it's a signal that you have to be very careful about how you interact with consumers. It's more and more a smartphone, particularly tablet, I guess, as well, but it's an extension of self, and this is where I would agree with the opening speaker tomorrow. I didn't disagree with anything he said, but it's very futuristic. But if you think about it, it is already an exoskeleton. You know, the smartphone is part of you. So a brand, whoever they are, invading that space is invading your personal space. It's like standing close to someone and speaking to them like that. Yeah? So you have to be conscious of that and think about that in the way that you market. It doesn't mean you can't, but it does mean you have to be cautious and think about the right ways of going there. And I think really just a hard reality check for today, wherever it all may go in the future, this is the share of screen time between screens. And I'm not even talking about out-of-home screens, which a colleague will talk about next. We'll talk about the out-of-home opportunity. Strictly speaking, we could have looked at more screens than we did. But even within just the 4 that we looked at, smartphones have 35% share of time. That's the global reality. I don't actually have specific numbers for LatAm on this chart, but it will be the same, a very similar proportion. That's the spend split. Now, even with some resistivity in terms of what you can say and how you can behave in a marketing context in smartphones, that looks odd to me if you're a consumer marketer. Aren't consumer marketers supposed to be responsive to consumers, understanding where their consumers are and marketing to consumers in the context of their lives? That's looking like we're missing a trick there. And this is the prediction through to, and this is, I think, a Zenith Optimedia, to give the right people credit for the forecasting prediction, of spend to 2016. It's going to grow a hell of a lot. So in terms of percentage annual growth, it's massive. Even that looks weak, because if you think about how the evolution of the technology and people's usage of the technology is, it's probable that the smartphone share of time is going to be even higher in the future, not less. So I guess what I would urge is that brand marketers think a little bit harder about moving there faster. Now, finally, I just want to wrap up with a couple of slides that just show that some of this stuff works. Now, this is back to measurement again. I'm a researcher. We also have a solution called cross-media, which measures the effect of multi-channel campaigns, where we're lots of different marketing activities talking to consumers. We measure the effect on brand equity how we drive brand health through this solution. And the brand Z things you might have found in the next door room listing the LatAm brand top 50, really what we're trying to do here is measure what drives that brand equity. Because we know it pays. Bigger brands, more profits, faster growth, stronger brands. So it's an ROI, but it's not sales, yeah? It's about brand equity. And this is the global average, and I've consolidated this into 3 chunks for simplicity and to save time. If we look at the share of spend, the top bar on TV, the share of spend on digital, and the share of spend on other, and when I say digital here, it really means online and mobile, yeah? So obviously, out of home, a lot of those are now digitized media as well. But in this context, out of home, radio, print, those sorts of media are included in the red bucket. That's the share of spend. The bars below are attributes that we know are behind strong brands. Strong brand equity that delivers higher price premium, higher growth, the overall summary we call brand power, strength of the brand, and the strength of the brand's potential into the future. That's the share of spend, and that's the share of effect measured through a database of 350 studies globally currently. Yeah? And these are the numbers for Latin America. Yeah? Now, it's a fairly small pool. We've only run about, I think it's about 16 or 17 studies in Latin America at the moment. We're beginning to do a lot more of them. But the average is still a guide to where things are. And the truth is that the skew is even bigger, yeah? And the real big gap is in the digital space, and obviously a big component to that is phone usage. So in pure hard, you want to move your consumers' hearts and minds closer to your brand terms, you need to move to where they are because it works as well, per dollar spent, yeah? So I think it's an imperative. And the last thing I want to say is, and it's a really important point, we focus in this study on screens, but it's not just about screens. These are results from that same cross-media database, a brief explanation of what these mean. We can look at effects that are just soulless media effects, i.e. effects from just being exposed to marketing in one channel, but we can also test to see if there is an additional effect that comes from being exposed in multiple channels. That's what we call multi-channel synergy effects. It's real 1 + 1 = 3 stuff. It means if you get an exposure in TV, you get +1. Exposure in digital, you get +1. You get both, you get +3. Because they work symbiotically, synergistically to drive more. People have a better understanding of what you're saying because they've encountered it in different contexts and you've spoken to them in different ways. It's massively powerful. It says that you should be judging media as much on duplication as unique reach, which freaks the media agency industry out, because actually it's important to speak to people in multiple contexts. It really works. But those synergies are as much between traditional media as they are between digital media. The consumer mind makes connections even if technology doesn't. So you can be exposed to an out-of-home placement. You'll see lots of brilliant opportunities for that from Clear Channel shortly. You can be exposed still to print ads. Lots of people do still read, do still use the old-fashioned stuff. And you can see a smart ad. And that will work better than just seeing a smart ad or just seeing a smartphone ad and just seeing print ad, or with TV. The consumer's mind is incredibly flexible, malleable, and it feeds and processes information. It can take stimulus and connect them even when there isn't a technological interaction device. And that's really what this chart's about. Connections matter beyond digital technology. They're the way brands talk to consumers. And I guess, in summary, what should you do? 3 real things. 1, mobilize fast. You can't get away from it. Your consumers are spending time on mobile. It's where they live their lives. It is an extension of self. It is, to use the words from this morning, an exoskeleton of the modern human. So you have to go there. No one knows exactly how to go there. There are lots of challenges. I know it's difficult, but it's where your people are, and that's where brands need to be. But connect with consumers across multiple channels, not just mobile. You really need to be speaking to people in multiple places, in multiple contact points, because consumers can join the dots, even when technology doesn't. Technology helps them join the dots often. The dual screening between TV and smartphones, the interaction between a near-field communication and your out-of-home placements. All of those things technology can facilitate, but it happens with or without it. So you need to think about how you leverage multiple opportunities to speak to consumers, but be sensitive to consumers' channel relationships. You know, taking the smartphone again as an example, it's a very personal device. You have to think carefully and learn and work how you can best reach your consumers through it. It has massive potential. There are brilliantly clever things I'm sure you'll hear about here. If those of you who are at the awards will hear awards of tremendous use of new technology and everything else. So it's possible. But you do need to think about the context and the role that different media opportunities play in people's lives and use them in a way that's relevant and meaningful to consumers in that sense. So that's me finished. I hope I've not overrun too much.